Today, I'm joined by retired Colonel Daniel Davis to go through what could be big news or the beginning of big news with the Russia-Ukraine war. Colonel Davis, thank you so much for joining me again.
Hey, Steve, always a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
So the big news story in the last 24 hours is that Ukraine has agreed to a ceasefire. Russia, Vladimir Putin said he's open to it, but wants to speak with President Trump again. Where do you see this going from here?
Yeah, you have to look at this in the whole context of what's been said around it, what's been said before, especially on the Russian side, and what they're saying now. And when you see this, you see that Putin is saying, I'm conceptually willing to talk about that, but only if certain conditions apply to it. And the conditions that he's talking about before are really, really hard for anybody, either in Kiev, or Washington to agree to. So it's a long, long way from actually coming into effect. Well, some of the key things that Russia is saying is, hey, we're on the move here. We're literally moving forward everywhere on the front, from Kursk all the way around to the southern Kherson area. And you got to give us some kind of incentive to want to do this, because otherwise there's no value in it for us. But there's huge value in it for the Ukraine side if you just pause everything. He said, so I want to know who's going to monitor this? What are going to be the enforcement mechanisms? Because we wouldn't agree to this unless there is no reinforcement by the Ukraine side. There's no additional training. They don't move any weapons up. They don't keep training people, meaning that they're not just going to use this for a pause to get strength up to come back and continue fighting us. He said, we want this only as a prelude to having an end of the war, and not just the end of the conflict, but to address the root causes. And there is your first big clue of what the Russians have in mind, because what they have said is that they want some kind of, or they have implied rather, that they want some kind of agreement before a ceasefire goes into effect, that the end result is going to be all the administrative borders of the four regions, which means large swaths of territory currently controlled by the Ukraine military, that there's going to be what they call denazification, which basically means that there's going to have to be a presidential election, and somebody besides Zelensky is going to have to sign it. Or even if Zelensky runs and wins, that's fine, but then he's passed an election. And then one of the bigger ones is the demilitarization. And they have said as recently as the 24th of December at their government level that is specifically defined as basically a constabulary force of 85,000 total armed forces for Ukraine. Those apparently would have to be agreed on in principle before there would be a willingness to ceasefire. Otherwise, the Russians say they're just going to keep fighting.
Okay. So let me make sure I understand, because what I understand is that Europe and the United States and NATO, they didn't allow Ukraine to be a part of NATO, but they basically made them into a very big military. Putin is saying, we don't want them to be a big military anymore.
Right. No, yeah. I mean, they, if I'm not mistaken, I think on the eve of the war in 2022, the Ukraine side was somewhere around 250,000. So less than half of what they started before the war. And they're allegedly somewhere around 800,000 now. So they're talking about demobilizing about 700,000 Ukraine soldiers to bring this war to an end.
Wow. Okay. That's a big number.
And of course, the additional thing is that they said there would be no negotiations with NATO at all, no foreign military forces either, no, NATO peacekeepers, no European peacekeepers who are in NATO, et cetera. They said those are off the table. Apparently, those also have to be going, or there won't be a ceasefire. So you see, the standards are really high.
Yeah. Well, as I was reading through it, the message that I took away was, we don't want a ceasefire. We want a done deal. It's like we either meet these demands or else we're not going to stop, because otherwise you guys aren't serious. Where in other parts of the world, a ceasefire might be the beginning stage. And I think we'll eventually get there. But it sounds like Russia wants to be a little bit more forward thinking. Maybe it's that chess playing mentality of let's get a couple of moves ahead. But would would President Trump end up going to Ukraine or Russia, or would they come to the United States, or would envoys meet in Saudi Arabia again?
Yeah, all those things are actually possible. Apparently, according to the Putin, I think, and also some in the White House, that the two leaders could talk on the phone as earlier as the next day or two. They actually might get on the phone to chat about some of this. There has been some talk about where they may meet, some in Saudi Arabia, some in Russia, some even in the United States. That's a possibility of some places that they could meet. But the real issue is that you talked about how this can sometimes happen. Let's look at the situation in the Korean War. So from 1950 until 1951, mid through or so, there was lots of back and forth. We went all the way to the Yalu River. Then they drove us back to the Pusan. And then we drove back kind of to the mid-ground, et cetera. I think Seoul was taken and lost like 4 times during the war, whatever. But then they said, all right, well, let's enter into a negotiated period to try to bring this to an end. So from about mid-1951, I believe, until an armistice was signed in 53, there was nonstop fighting. No one ever stopped fighting because the two sides had a veritable parity. Nobody had a real advantage over the other, which is why that they were trying to have a ceasefire to end the thing, which turned into an armistice, that never turned into a full peace. That's not the case here. Russia is in the unequivocal senior position. And to my knowledge, nobody in the history of warfare from a position of superiority in all the categories that go into making national military power has agreed to a ceasefire that would only benefit the weaker side. They have no motivation to do that. They have some significant advantages that they have on the battlefield, diplomatically, militarily, economically, et cetera. And they're not, I can't even imagine that they're just going to hand that over without some severe concessions from the other side. If they can get some of those big concessions, like an agreement in principle on those, in state before it starts, then they may be willing to do that. But it's going to be a big ask and a big give for that to happen.
Okay. My worry is for the safety of President Trump. I don't know that he's safe in Ukraine. I think he might be safer in Russia than in Ukraine. But is this why they're using Saudi Arabia as a middle ground?
Well, I think I don't know if that's a concern on the administration side. I certainly hope that's not something they have to be worried about. But I think it's more because it's a neutral site. That's the reason they chose that for the meeting between the United States and Russia, between the United States and Kiev. Everything's been in Saudi Arabia so far as a neutral ground for negotiations. And I imagine they would probably continue on with the trend.
Okay. A week ago or so, President Trump stopped all aid to Ukraine, military equipment to Ukraine, intelligence delivery to Ukraine. Now that's back up and running. As we get closer to an end, could President Putin demand that the United States back off to show that they're serious about ending this war?
That there's all kinds of demands that could be made, and I think that's what Steve Witkoff is in Moscow right now as we speak to try and negotiate some of that. There was a lot of news in Russia today when he showed up. And I guess one of the senior negotiators on the Russian side met him there and had a press conference, and he laid out some of these things. He says, we're conceptually willing to talk about this, but we're not going to do a ceasefire. We're not going to agree to stop fighting until we have some kind of promises and assurances where this is going to go. So that was kind of reinforcing what's to happen here. And, to me, there's a lot of optimism in the air in both the United States and in some parts of Europe. But I'm not sure that I'm optimistic yet. I'm not even cautiously optimistic yet. I've got to see something come out of that. I want to see something about what Steve Witkoff said, possibly even later tonight. If he gives us any reason to have optimism, then cool, I am, because I am 100% supportive of anything that ends this conflict immediately. So that the dying stops. I'm fully supportive of what President Trump's doing on that. I just think that the path to get there is going to be a little more difficult than some may believe.
Okay. Something I noticed was for the meeting, Vladimir Putin showed up in Russian camo. He was outfitted. He's typically in a navy blue suit, kind of a purplish tie, white shirt. Was this signaling anything? We just happen to catch him on camera, not in his suit? What are your any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think that it was definitely a signal. I'm not aware. Maybe there has been some, but I'm not aware of a single time in the entire war since February 2022 that he appeared on camera in a camouflage suit. He's done it a few times in the past. I've actually seen some of those images floating around, but years past, I haven't seen him at all in the since this war kicked off until yesterday. And I think that is a noteworthy thing because he went to the front. He went to the Kursk area. He met with Gerasimov, the general in charge of the Russian armed forces. And they have been absolutely crushing the Ukraine side in the Kursk pocket. And, they've been fighting for 7 months, basically just keeping the cauldron open. And I think that there's a lot of evidence to support that that's exactly what they were doing, while the Ukraine side kept on putting reinforcements after reinforcement and sending vehicles and ammunition and logistics, all those kinds of things not available to anywhere else on the front. So Russia just kept letting them come in and shooting like fish in a barrel. And apparently there was tens of thousands of casualties on that. And whatever the number actually was, I don't take anybody's word for anything. I just know it was probably high. I know for sure that they didn't have all of those resources in the areas that mattered in Ukraine. So there was a big cost on it. But it appears that now that we're getting into what appears to be the end state for bringing this to some kind of an end, I think Russia just said, all right, we're done with this. It's now time to close this off. And then they just made a decision. And from the 8th of March on, this thing's just going in huge chunks by the day. And it's almost gone now. There's, I think, only 4 settlements left in the pocket. And then it's down to the border. One other important thing that happened in that meeting you mentioned where Putin was in his fatigues, he told Gerasimov, we need to set up a buffer zone in the Sumy Oblast here to make sure that they can't reach Russia. And when you look at a map and you see where the Ukraine side can best reach Moscow, the closest area is in, I think it's called the Chernihiv area, which is a little to the west. Yeah, a little to the west of where the Kursk pocket has been. And I think it's entirely possible that once Russia reestablishes the border between the two, to drive Ukraine completely out of Kursk, I don't think they're going to stop there. And you may see them pick up paces and move a little bit further to the west and move down even further because they want to take out the launch sites. For example, on the day a lot of these talks with the U.S. and Kiev started in Jeddah, where we were trying to get them to agree to a full ceasefire. Ukraine chose that day to launch 350 some odd drones and stuff into Russia, to include Moscow, which is obviously trying to spit in the face of the side that you allegedly are trying to reach a negotiated settlement with. That was not missed on the Russian side. It was not forgiven on the Russian side. And I think that's why they turned in. Now they're really trying to crush them out and may go even further. We'll see how that plays into all these negotiations.
Okay. I have a feeling Putin was signaling something. Just like lately, President Trump has been wearing purple ties. He doesn't usually do that, but I think he's trying to say red and blue. I want to be the president of the entire country, not just of the Republicans. I think something about those fatigues was signaling either we're willing to go forward if you don't meet. I don't know. I just feel like
the average person today is feeling the financial strain more than ever. Expenses are up, wages aren't keeping pace, and many are finding it nearly impossible to make ends meet. With little left over after covering the basics, it's no surprise that many are resorting to credit cards just to get by, often carrying high balances and high interest rates, sometimes in the 20 and 30% area. If you're a homeowner and you're stuck in this cycle of mounting debt, you need to call my friends at American Financing. Their salary-based mortgage consultants are saving homeowners on average $800 a month, helping put your hard-earned money back where it belongs, in your pocket. Plus, if you act now, you might be able to skip your next mortgage payment. There are no upfront fees, so it costs you nothing to find out how much you could save each month. It's time to break free from the stress of debt. Call American Financing and take control of your financial future. Call them at 888-686-8030. Again, that's 888-686-8030, or visit americanfinancing.net/Gardner.
I for sure took it that way. And the fact that he went to the front, because he rarely goes to the front, very rare. And think that he's been emphatic about talking about that they're going to hold all the Ukrainian people. Another thing he said in that conference was all of the Ukrainian fighters who've been in there are going to be held to Russian standards of terrorism because of what they claim the Ukraine side has been doing in torturing the population and killing old people and stuff. I don't have any idea if any of that's true. I know it's a lot of claims. A lot of videos are out there that says this, but the fact is the Russians believe it, just like the Ukrainians believe that the Bucha thing in 2022 was a murdering a bunch of civilians by the Russian side. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But the Ukrainians believe it. Well, the same thing's happening here, which is creating anger in the Russian population, and they want justice. So he's saying that, first of all the POWs we have are going to be vetted and investigated for terrorism, not for war, just normal POW kind of situation. And then they're talking about how they want to make a buffer zone. So I think wearing that uniform, he is saying we're not looking to wind this down. We're looking to continue to take action here until we can secure the border ourselves. And I think that people should be paying a lot more attention to that.
Yeah, he showed up as a military president versus a businessman president. So give me your thoughts on this. Just up until a few days ago, it seemed like Europe wanted more war with Russia via Ukraine. And today, Ukraine says we're open to peace and ceasefire. Is that because they realize President Trump isn't going to back down? He's not going to give in? Why the sudden change? I was shocked to read this because everything seemed like Europe was signaling we want more war.
Well, a couple of things. First, you had General Keith Kellogg, the special envoy for the Russia-Ukraine war in the Trump administration, was asked, I guess it's 4 or 5 days ago now, they said, hey, why did Trump withhold intelligence? Why did he put a pause on the substance? It said ahead of that meeting in Jeddah. And he said, well, sometimes you got to hit a mule upside the head with a 2x4 to get their attention. That's what he said of Ukraine, that was the case. So there has been some very strong language, and that's in public. You can only imagine what must have been said behind the scenes, that Trump is serious about getting this over with. Now, around that same time, you also had Ursula von der Leyen and several other European leaders who came out and said, hey, we're going to have this new Rearm Europe deal, and we're going to put $800 billion into this. A lot of it's going to go in to help Ukraine. A lot of it's other parts is going to go to help the individual member states to increase their capacity because we think Russia is going to be the big evil guy and we're going to arm up against them, et cetera. And that has not really gone down. They're saying that still, even though, because apparently the mule got hit upside the head with 2x4, got the message, and then in Jeddah came out saying that he would agree to a full ceasefire when prior to the meeting, Zelensky, and I believe this was as recently as Monday, said, I'm not going to do that. We'll do a sky and a sea, but we're not going to stop fighting on the land. And then he comes out of that meeting, or his people do, said, no, yeah, that's cool. A full ceasefire is fine. So apparently that message got sent behind the scenes. But Europe is still going forward with wanting to help Ukraine. They still are having this meeting. And I think tomorrow, in fact, there's going to be a meeting of 30 so-called Organization of the Willing, Coalition of the Willing, 30 members within Europe who are going to talk about having what's the word they use? Not robust, but a muscular peace enforcement force that they perceive is going to patrol any agreement that's made between the two. And Stephen, I'm just telling you, that's just sheer fantasy that Russia would ever even consider allowing a robust military force made up of individual NATO members is just fantasy. There's no way they would ever agree to that. That will be a deal breaker if they even try that. And yet they're still meeting. They're still talking about it. So there's still a big disconnect between, I think, what Trump wants, what the Russians are willing to accept, and what the Europeans are trying to do.
Okay. When like a few months into the war, when Biden sends Boris Johnson, kills all the agreements, and the war starts to get really, really bloody, Prime Minister Viktor Orban of Hungary said there's only one person in this world that can end this war, and that's Trump. At this time, he's at home golfing. He's, no longer president. And now he's back in. even Putin was signaling today, I want to thank Donald Trump for paying attention to this situation. And then he says, I'm conceptually open to a ceasefire, not until I speak with Trump again. This seems like Trump is the only one that has the cojones to actually get this thing done. Ukraine, it seems like they're kicking against this. A lot of Europe is, but I just think without the support and money of the United States, I just don't see how this thing continues.
Yeah, you're 100% right. I mean, you see, if Kamala Harris had won the election, they would have just kept the status quo going without any change at all. No one would be talking about peace. No one would be talking about a ceasefire, et cetera. So Trump is the only one. Obviously, Viktor Orban, Robert Fico, they've had this desire for a long time, but they didn't have the power to bring it off, whether diplomatically, militarily, or otherwise. Whereas Trump has all of those things, and he is definitely, in the big boy shoes, and he's the one who, tells people what they're going to do, et cetera. So he's committed himself to this path here, and the thing that encourages me the most, why I've been the most excited about a lot of this, is because Trump is looking beyond the war. He's already looking with Russia that says, hey, you're a superpower, global nuclear power. You're not going anywhere. We're not going anywhere. China's not going anywhere. But let's look at how we can make this world a safer place for everybody by getting these big nuclear powers. Let's start talking about nuclear reduction treaties. Let's look to get the New START treaty, which expires in February of next year. We need to do something with that to keep that going. And we need to increase economic aid, et cetera. There are some real positive things that are on the table here right now that are being discussed that I'm a big fan of. Like they say, Trump and some of his team are saying, if we get this deal off, part of it may be repairing relations between the West and Europe, such that they can do business. Putin said so today. This very day, he said, we're open to that. You can come and do business with us. We can have the pipelines be open again. You can get our cheap gas back again. That will improve your relations. So while you got the European Union all talking about how we can rearm and get bigger, and there's a big bad bear, Russia, for their side, is saying, we want to do business with you. We want to forget the issue of war. We want to get it off the table and get back to having normalized relations. Fortunately, Trump is in that same category. So even if it's kicking and screaming, Trump may be able to bring Europe into a position for its own benefit that it gets war off the table.
Yeah. He said something early in his presidency that caught me off guard, but he basically said something to the effect of, if China and America can work together, we could have world peace. Like basically, like if the two superpowers will just quit trying, just acknowledge you're a superpower, but don't try to be the world police, and just like the world would get along better. And as far as like trade with Russia, you don't kill partners that you trade with, right? And so
Right.
if he can turn this into a business relationship versus you used to be the USSR and we're America. And I think his business mind is going, wait a minute, you don't kill the people you do business with. You find contracts, you negotiate. So it'll be really interesting to see what you and I are talking about with this relationship down the road. Let me switch gears back to business here in the United States. Why do you think so many countries and businesses are suddenly saying America looks like a really great place to put hundreds of billions of dollars? Is it because Trump has shown the world that America wants to be a safe place for their money, for their businesses, for their ideas? Is it just to avoid tariffs? Is it a shift away from globalism? Why do you think so much money is suddenly pouring into America?
Well, I think it's part of a lot of those, but I think it's more just because of an act of the will that Trump wants that to happen, and he's actively seeking it. And it puzzles me why every president doesn't do that. It doesn't seem like that should be a complicated deal. It shouldn't be a partisan issue. I mean, why wouldn't anyone who won the office of presidency of the United States work to try and increase our own industrial capacity, our own production capacity, try to bring in foreign direct investment in ways that benefit our country? I don't see what's controversial about that at all, but I'm glad he's doing it.
Yeah. I've been shocked by some of the numbers. I mean, he's up into the trillions of dollars of groups saying, we want to be a part of America. We want to dump all this money in. We'll create American jobs. Well, it's like, all of a sudden we're a good investment again, where maybe under Biden, they're like, okay, their border's not secure. They've got all these people flooding in from all over the world. They got all this DEI stuff. Like, I don't know. And suddenly all of that gets cleaned up and all this money just starts dumping out. It's been really fascinating to watch.
Yeah. And plus, this also is something that's positive in the sense that there is a definite international move and fed by both China and Russia, and for understandable reasons, that they have been wanting to move away from the dollar being the only international trade currency, because that's our biggest, weapon that we can use for sanctions, et cetera. And so they've been trying to move to alternative or a basket of different currencies to move away from. This is something that could kind of put a dent in that. And, with the whole thing with the BRICS meeting or whatever, and or the BRICS movement rather, and them wanting to maybe even someday have a currency for that, et cetera. Those are things that are not good for our national security. But we can't compel anybody to do that, but we can encourage them to believe that the U.S. by our actions is a safe place to put your money. And by having a lot of people come here and invest in our economic stability, they also, now it's mutual benefit, and it diminishes people's interest in having something besides the dollar be the international currency. So that's another big reason to do this, aside from all the other ones you just mentioned.
Yeah. I just had another thought. I'm not like a brilliant finance guy or anything, but in the past, ever since World War II, whenever things got scary around the world, the American treasury bills and bonds used to be where money flooded, right? And because it was such a safe harbor. And I think maybe people are saying, well, why don't we just bypass the government and make a bigger return in America versus the American government? I wonder if they're now just saying, wait a minute, we can get the safety of America, but also the safety of just owning a business versus depending on the federal government to keep their financial obligation. Just a thought.
Yeah, I mean that if I was an international business wanting to come in, I would want to go wherever I thought was the safest and the best return on investment. And that's why I'm a big advocate of, let's make sure that, let's give people a reason to want to do that, to give people a reason to trust our government by being trustworthy, by keeping our word, and to doing things that are mutually beneficial. That's how we get that. I mean, that's what can reverse some damage in the past, and I'd love to see us go in that direction more.
Yeah, well, I think we are. Colonel Davis, thank you so much. You've got a show right here on YouTube, The Deep Dive. I want to put a direct link if you want to continue to learn about what's going on with the military, with President Trump, with the different wars, the coming to the end of war. Definitely check that out, and I will put a direct link. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Always a pleasure to be here, Stephen. Thank you very much.